Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to TechGig webinar series, our endeavor to impart techies. We believe that sharing of knowledge is key to enhance our skills and grow us as professionals. With this principle in mind, we have initiated a series of webinars conducted by industry experts to give you all a crisp insight of various domains. The topic of today's session is Managing Privileged Identities using IBM Privileged Identity Manager. Our guest speaker today is Mr. Abhay Kabale, Security Solution Architect at IBM ISL Lab Services. Abhay has 15 years of IT experience with 9 years in identity and access management area using IBM security products. He was working in a consultant architect role for large telecom retail customers in USL and India. So without further delay, I introduce you all to our guest speaker. Over to you, Abhay.
Welcome all. Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. As we have gathered here to go over the IBM Privileged Identity Manager to manage the privileged identities. So I'll go with the agenda. So we'll be talking about the privileged identities, their problems around them, risks around them. We'll talk about the different models followed by most of the organizations and the problems around them. We'll talk about the product features, the concept, the solution architecture of privileged identity management solution, and then we'll talk about configuration overview. It's going to be a quite high level. We'll talk about requests, how the requests are made, approvals, and the flow. Then we'll talk about the usage in a manual and the automated way. We'll talk about reports. Then we'll talk best practices, scenarios, and prerequisites. And then we'll finally conclude that with Q&A session. So, what is a privileged identity? Most of us know that, just to set the context, an identity which has legitimate access or administration rights to sensitive information on mission-critical systems. So these are not just these are not necessarily the personal accounts or what we call individual accounts. Often these are shared between multiple users. So examples, you have root administrator, you have DB2 admin, you have IT manager, sec master, and so on and so forth. These are powerful accounts to a system, and they can, there are problems all around it as they are quite powerful. So we'll go to the next slide. What are the problems around privileged identities? So I've categorized in 3 areas. So let's go with the default system identities. You have root, administrator, sec master, DB2 admin, and so on and so forth. So these are powerful accounts which are usually shared for convenience by the administrators. Now that brings a challenge with accountability. Who really used it and the actions performed under it. So accountability is a problem here. So next, for the user-defined system identities, they're like application identities. You have operational identities to do your operational activities. Then you have identities with system level privileges. So most of these applications do not do the application level audit, and they don't log that information. And if they do, they are not uniform. And even they are doing it, they are not centralized. So then the correlation becomes very difficult. So that's one of the issue there. Next, you have individual user identities. yes, we are solving accountability, but we are having huge number of IDs out there generating and maintaining that leads to identity proliferation. So just to summarize, these IDs could be misused as and shared for convenience, resulting to loss of accountability. Next, privileges to individual identities lead to identity proliferation, which is a cost, and there are some other points we'll discuss down the line. We have a focus slide on that. Password safety violations due to strong password strength and policy. Since these are privileged IDs, companies tend to enforce strong password strength, resulting into administrators not remembering these passwords. They end up writing it down, sharing it across in a flat file or an Excel, etc., making it more insecure. This is the last one is difficult to ensure compliance and the audit. So these are the problems around privileged identities. So what damage can be done by using privileged identities? Establish new user definitions. Now, when we say this, privileged ID, I could set up a user in such a way that it gets unnoticed by any of the identity management policy enforcements. So let's say your identity manager is configured to certain user schema to detect if it is non-compliant. What a misuse can happen is I could change the schema of a different type and make sure it is not under the radar. It's under the radar of identity management. So I could have my own password policy and get away from this. Because I'm a privileged user, I could do that. So if I'm a root user, I could create a new ID which does not come under this policy. So this is one which can result into security loopholes. Yeah, for user convenience it's good, but you're leaving a loophole which is a problem. So that's the damage you create by having several IDs of that sort in the environment. Next, change other users' capability. So if I am a privileged administrator, I could grant more privileges to other user outside the process, which is a problem, which makes it into misuse and non-compliant. Especially when you consider change management, there are several alternate ways people could go in and make changes without following the process, and resulting into several downtimes or outages because of abrupt changes to the environment. Next, you have create other privileged user without any traceability, accountability. It results into elevated risk now. Disabling, denying access to service required by a user. This will result in impact of business operations. So that's about changing the user capability. Next, you could, as a privileged user, you could have access to this sensitive information. You could misuse that information. It could have a financial impact. So that's very much important these days, because there is a lot of IP related information being leaked out. It really impacts companies from their shares wise and financial losses. So next, change audit logs. I could, as a privileged user, I could tamper with the files. I could change, I could remove the footprint by just deleting the logs or nulling the logs. I could do that. So those are the damages one could do using privileged identities. So technically, privileged identities may, by their intent, own a system completely. They could do anything with that. So next, we talked about privileged identities, problems with them. now problems around them. And then now let's talk about different models followed by most of the organizations and what are the issues around it. So first model is everyone in an administrator role has identity on every system all the time. Let's say there are a group of administrators. Now all of them gets access on all of the servers, which is a problem. You have identity proliferation. You start creating IDs as many as those administrators on various servers. Second, you have impact on your productivity because you need to remember those many servers, your IDs, your credentials or your passwords for those servers. You need to make sure all are changed, updated, compliant, etc. Increased security risk. There are more IDs with privileged access. Yes, of course, the risk goes higher. Management cost increases because you have to make sure those are compliant. You have to do all those revalidations, which is a cost. Disabled, terminated user identities. Now, here, when you have individual IDs in the environment, whenever a person moves out, most of the companies do not delete these IDs from a policy standpoint. They keep it for a certain period of time and then remove it. Till that period, there is a risk of having these IDs in the environment. Now this happens because your individual IDs are there in the environment with privileged access. Next, business continuity impact. There are several instances where IDs have been deleted, which are tagged to be terminated, but deletion of those IDs bring down the environments. So that's how it impacts business continuity. So this is, again, these are the issues around the first model. Second, everyone in administrator role has access to a single user ID credential for ease of administration. So that's where we are talking about shared IDs. So there are privileged IDs like you have root. Root might be shared across administrators because it's the convenience. They can, use it. Still, you somehow could manage with sudo access, but there are systems where you can't have sudo type of access. You will need this ID to be shared. Network devices. There you need to have these IDs shared between the teams who are supporting it or administrating it. So accountability challenges show up because you don't know who really logged in at that time using that ID and did the changes. Finally, your log shows administrator did the change. So that's the issue. Next is password management and distribution challenges. Let's say there are 10 administrators having access to one ID. Now, the moment the password is changed, you need to update all of these users with the new password. Now, how are you going to distribute it? Emails or whatever. Again, there is a risk there. The other thing is, if one person out of 10 administrators leaves out, you're supposed to change the passwords. Now, how often that is being done? If it is not done for the convenience, that person moving out still knows the credentials. There are ways he could loop in or he could, hack into. So that's another issue. Scope of non-compliance. You have traceability issues, operational risk, because now in this model you're giving, let's say there are 10 people in administrator role, all have access to this ID, which means irrespective of skill level, you're still giving the access to them. There's no approval or review process to really control that and see if this person can really use this ID in a appropriate way and understands the risk. So that's a problem there. So you still have a risk, lack of auditing. So all these problems comes with this model of having administrator role, people in a administrator role to have access to this single user ID. Now, the third model, pseudo person identity challenges. So this is the most followed model where the IDs let's say these privileged IDs are tagged to one pseudo person object, and this person object is being owned by several people. Now we'll have delegation challenges. You have accountability is a problem because you still, you have all these IDs tagged to one person object. Delegation becomes a challenge. Accountability is still a problem. You have a risk of software limitations because you have like thousands and thousands of IDs being tagged to one person. So the software has a limitation there. So you'll have issues with the softwares also. Role policy definition gets convoluted because at one side you are saying if a person falls into this role, he gets access to the ID. The other side, you are tagging all these IDs to a person object. So it's kind of a mixed setup when you have the pseudo person identity. Next, you still have issues with SOD policies or the segregation of duties policies. Now you can't have a control out there because at one side you are having these IDs owned by the pseudo person, which is in turn delegated to a person, plus you have a role. When you have a role to this delegation, you can't really do the segregation of duty check. You need to have a role-to-role check. So that's the problem with pseudo person identity. Next, we go with the business as usual approach. That is the scenario where you have accounts lack clear responsibility. It's not structured. Sharing privileged ID or accounts password without adequate controls. No audit trails. It talks about administrator did it or done using root ID or some generic ID and not the specific user. Difficult to maintain good password management practices. So as I mentioned earlier, usually privileged IDs have elevated password strength. So that results into privileged users ending up writing it on paper, docs, Excel, and sharing it with the teams. And the last thing is lack of monitoring. You don't have adequate monitoring for these IDs, these privileged IDs in a business as usual approach. Okay, now let's talk about identity proliferation. We have been using this term for a while now. So basically, let's take a scenario here. You have a small team with few servers. You have 4 administrators, 100 servers. You have, each one having an ID on each of the servers, 400 privileged user IDs. That's still okay. Now the problem begins when you start adding more people, more servers. Your data centers, it's a big team. You have 40,000, in this case 40 administrators, 1,000 servers, 40,000 privileged user IDs. The same way it goes from 400 to 4 million privileged user IDs, even we considering one ID on these each of these servers. Now result, security risk, cost of administration, productivity goes down. So these are direct impact on having these many IDs in the environment or with the privileged access. So that's identity proliferation. Now, why do we care for privileged identities? Because 3 of the top 10 security threats to enterprise are insider related. Either employee error, because it could be skill level, or data stolen by partner or an employee who is terminated or he has still access to the environment. Insider sabotage. Insider-driven fraud costs U.S. enterprises around $600 billion annually. So that's a huge amount. You have these news lines which talk about, example here, San Francisco case. A user with Terry Childs, he hijacked the system and refused to turn over the password for the network. So it was around 1 week the servers were totally under control of this hacker, bringing down the impact on the environment, bringing down the business. So that's so big. In another case, a French bank was rocked by a rogue trader who hacked into the system, and he made huge unauthorized trades. He hid it for several months, which how he could do because of the loopholes in the environment. There's another one. So this lady in Colorado Department of Revenue, she was supposed to fix the IDs or clean the IDs, and she ended up cleaning it out. So what she did is she changed the passwords of supervisors who had left the office or the State Department, and she forged their signatures and did the transactions. So what was missing? Deactivating user accounts and resetting passwords when an employee is left. Monitoring use of privileges and suspicious accounts. Segregation of duties. This lady had access to manage users plus also do some business transaction, which is a segregation of duty violation. So if separation or segregation of duty was control was in place, this issue wouldn't have happened at least. So that's why we need to care privileged identities. Who does really care? It's our auditors. There are industry compliance standards, PCI, SOX, you have HIPAA, TRI, and so on and so forth. They have several controls suggested, and those need to be addressed, and these are quite much around privileged identities, especially insufficient internal controls over privileged accounts negatively impacts an organization's capability to meet the above requirement of storing the protecting the cardholders' data. So, and even maintaining the secure systems and the applications. Restrict access to cardholders' data by business need to know. So this is why it is so important, and auditors really look into it, in a very detailed way, and they need the justification of each of those access made for any of these activities done using privileged IDs. All right. So now we talked about privileged identities, we talked about models, we talked about various issues, news lines which talked about the misuse of these IDs happened. Now let's get into the IBM's security framework and the product side of the house. IBM has a security framework which addresses 5 areas as described here. You have people and identity, data and information, application and process, network, server and endpoint, physical infrastructure. So IBM Privileged Identity Manager is, it falls under people and identity. We'll get into it. So that's about framework. Here we'll understand why effective management of privileged identities requires a complete closed loop process. It cannot be just just securing it. You have to close it from each of these cycles. So you have while creating, provision, locate, identify, label privileged identities, you have assign appropriate owner to it, change the password of the use, deprovision, remove access to the privileged ID once the user is terminated. That's from the lifecycle standpoint. From privileged identity management, process-wise, define privileged roles and entitlement, provision, deprovision, privileged IDs, and shared ID pools, request, approve, revalidate, privileged access, enforce OS control, enable accountable sharing, monitor and audit report. So that's the cycle of it. Now, in case of shared accounts, so you start with requesting an access. Then the access is approved. Then you get into the provisioning mode. In this case, it's based on the need. So let's say I want to use it now, then only then you'll get access to the ID. That's we call it as checkout. And then when you're done with your activity, you return it. That's where we call it as check-in. So that's one. Next is access revalidation, and then the access terminations. So that's the overall, why it requires the complete loop, closed loop process for privileged identities. Now, we'll talk about the product, IBM Privileged Identity Manager. So, PIM, IBM Security Privileged Identity Manager, provides a solution for organizations to address the end-to-end lifecycle management of accounts, single sign-on, and handling of privileged IDs across both systems and applications. So basically, it's the identity management system. Plus, you have single sign-on, and then you also have reports. Now, there are sub-components I would call in this solution. You have IBM Security Identity Manager, which helps you in the setting up the approval workflows to enforce least privileges and business need to know. Ensure password management, regular password changes, centralized ID management, password management, secured credential vault, improves overall security and adds more control. So now the vault is, the secure vault is part of IBM Security Identity Manager. Then you have IBM Security Access Manager, that is ESSO. It does the automated check-in, check-out and check-in and injections of credentials without user knowing the privileged account password. Single sign-on of all privileged IDs with strong authentication. Now when we say injection of credentials, we'll get to know what exactly it means. Most of us know. So for those people who have no idea of what the injection of credentials is, basically you have some interface where you want to log in with ID and password. Now this ID and password is automatically injected to the form or a dialog where the application is integrated. So that's where the credential injection comes in. So there is a manual and automated way. We'll talk about it. So you have on the right side you have QRadar, which helps you in advance custom reports, which will give you a holistic intelligence on identity and access management, plus the other network devices, to give you a bird's eye view on the behavior and the intelligence of how the user is coming, what route he is taking, what IDs with what servers he has logged in, and all those detail level reports you can get it using QRadar. Then you have Tivoli Common Reporting and Auditing System. This is more focused with the ITIM and ISIM, and there are other components it also can interact, but there are canned reports for ISAM and ISIM shared access management reports. You can even customize it. There are tools to customize. There are designers which can help you customize the reports. So that's about the introduction. So 1 minute. Okay. So newly introduced privileged identity management concept. Now this is the new thing we are bringing into privileged identity management. What I have is left side I have the best technical controls concepts. Right side I have privileged identity manager where I'm going to map these with the features available there. First is user gets ID on a system only if required by the business. That is through this is controlled by a self-service user interface request and approval workflow. So there is a UI through which you could make a request, and only it's approved, you'll get access. Next is user gets ID on a system only when required by the business. So this can be controlled by using ISIM's check-in checkout function. The ID or the user gets access only when he really makes a request to the server. It's kind of a real time with a pre-approved role or a pre-approved access. So that is one. Next, user gets ID on a system only till business requires user to have it. So now this you can control by having the recertification policies in place. So you can recertify, there are companies who do it quarterly or yearly or, once in a year or two. So it's configurable and you can, recertify at various department level or, to the whole company level. So you have next, user should not know or view the password. So this is quite secure way of making sure that administrator does not know the password. So this makes it quite safe and secure because let's say I'm an administrator and I want to do my activity. I don't have to know the password, but I get the session in my screen or in my desktop to that server. So I don't know the password, but I'm logged in automatically, which is like a safest thing because even if let's say I'm terminated from the company, I don't know the password. So there's no way, the misuse can happen. So this can be controlled by ISIM configuration and automated credential injection. So that's here. Next, this is more with the this is to counter ID proliferation. This is using the reusable ID concept. Now, earlier we talked about having one ID for a user on every system. Now, or several users, there are 10. We talked about identity proliferation, right? So now the other way is we'll have one ID without losing the accountability. It's being shared across the set of users. That's where the feature here is this can be leased by one administrator at a time using manual or automated check-in checkout process. So this is for single reusable credential. So it could be your root ID or it could be administrator ID. Now this can be shared across administrators, but This is going to be like one at a time. Now, when you have several users requiring access to these privileged IDs, then you can have pool of IDs, and based on the usage, you could instead of having, let's say, 100 servers are there, I need 100 IDs on that. It could be 100 or 200 IDs at the max. But if there are like 500 administrators, I don't need 5 into 200. Now I need just 200 IDs, so that it reduces down. These administrators who need that ID are going to do a checkout and use this ID and return it back. Now the pool can be configured based on the number of users who are going to use this system at any given point of time. So it's kind of safe and secure, and it reduces the number of IDs drastically. So that's the new concept which has which is part of IBM Privileged Identity Manager. So right side, we still we talked about reduces the number of individual IDs. We talked about so the moment IDs are reduced, correct? So now the deprovisioning activities also go down drastically. So which is a less load on on the servers for creating IDs and deleting, and same way it helps in achieving compliance, doing the revalidations. It reduces the time cycle drastically. Next, you can have the centralized authentication using Active Directory or IBM Directory Server. The features of this Privileged Identity Manager. There's one more nice feature out there. It's called SACLI, that is Shared Access CLI, which is command line interface, which can help automate the scripts. So let's say you have your scripts to run the jobs. So you could automate the scripts to check out these credentials on the fly and inject into the into the jobs and return it once the job is up and running. So this is the benefit of having, and these are this will put a complete control on the privileged IDs. So you as a user, as a privileged user, can run this service with your individual ID, but in the background it's going to use the privileged ID to run the job. So that's the cool thing of this, and these are the new concepts. Okay, so next slide. So we're talking about here key functions. Centralized management of privileged and shared identities, which helps because it's centralized. You have every inventory of all the IDs across the environment in one place. Role-based entitlement to the shared identities, secured access and storage of shared ID credentials. It's centralized, secured, stored in one place. Request privileged ID access, approvals, and recertifications. There's a way you could do it. You could make request, seek approvals, recertify, check for SOD violations or separation of duties violations before even assigning the roles. So that's kind of cool thing. Manual and automated check-in, check-out of reusable privileged identity credentials. Privileged access role membership recertification. You can even recertify the role for the privileged user, and then based on the role. Ability to change password of usable credentials after the use. Now let's say I am a privileged administrator. I have checked out these credentials. So somehow, let's say I managed to get the password, and now I could go in and change the password. But in this case, the moment you close the session, password will be automatically changed. So that's a good thing about it. So this makes sure that it's totally accountable. So whoever has checked in or returned the credentials, the moment he closes the session, it's passwords for that credentials are changed automatically. Auditing of shared credentials, their access, events, etc. End-to-end monitoring and reporting, delegate management of IDs and access policies to respective resource owners, automated password change that we talked about, automatic check-in when client closes the application or the client application is closed, automatic termination of client application upon lease expiry. So let's say you can set the lease here. Let's say there's a checkout. I can't, I can keep this ID for a while, but no, we can have a control on it, like how long he can keep it. So 4 hours to do his activity, 3 hours, you can have that limit set. And once the limit is crossed, you could have an option to enforce to terminate the session, or you can have the violation list or a report generated so that you can take action accordingly. Next, strong authentication to RFID cards, smart cards, and fingerprint biometrics. Whatever in today's date ISAM ESSO supports, you can have it integrated over here. So that's about key features. I have listed capability and the benefits here. Centralized privileged identity management improves IT governance and reduces risk. Securely share privileged identities, avoids the high cost of identity proliferation. That's the key feature of it. Automate sign-on and check-in, check-out with strong authentication, increases security, wide variety of out-of-box adapters and pre-configured access profiles, improves time to value. Full identity management and enterprise single sign-on capabilities provides comprehensive solution for tracking, reporting with accountability and compliance. Integration with broader identity and access management governance portfolio, common identity infrastructure for privileged and non-privileged users, reduces the operations cost. Now you're having everything here. You're having identity management and privileged identity management in one product. So that's the beauty of it. Now we'll talk about the product solution architecture. I say it product and then solution because there are several products. There is ISIM and ISAM part of this solution. So it follows a standard, supports 2 and 3 tier architecture. Here in the screen you can see there is an access agent sitting on the workstation for a user workstation. So this agent is running in the background, and it communicates with the identity and access manager servers. You have backend a directory server, you have database server, you have integrator to integrate with various adapters. You have TCR for collecting the data from various stores, data stores. It brings in and helps you generate the reports. So this is the overview of this architecture. It is scalable architecture. You can add more, you can scale it to number of servers horizontally, and you have high availability with help of WebSphere cluster, IDS replication. You can have DB to HADR. You can have HECMP on AIX. You can have load balancing for each of the adapters. You communicate with the backend servers. In this case, you can see you have Linux host, and the TDI runs a ESSO adapter. So you could have several adapters. You can have a load balancer in front of these adapters so that it's highly available. You have from a security standpoint, sensitive data is encrypted. Communication between these components and from outside to the servers are secured over SSL. Now, the other thing, good thing about it is extensibility. You can there are development kits, there are Access Studio tools which can help you integrate with various backend servers for provisioning, deprovisioning, for single sign-on automation. You can do integration with OTP server. You can have biometric integration. You could do all those things using the access profiles, studios. You can customize it. So that's the beauty of it. It doesn't just keep it, there are several out-of-box adapters and profiles. Beyond that, if there is a need, you still have, you can extend it to them. Now, let's talk about the configuration overview inside Privileged Identity Manager. So it's, most of us who have had experience with Identity Manager, the Tivoli Identity Manager, you would know that the concept is a bit similar to it. So here you have, let's say you have privileged users and you have the role owners. What you could do is you could create ISIM roles, access roles for each of these privilege credentials or the pools which you have defined. So it could be a domain administrator, or it could be a Windows local administrator. So it depends. So you can define these roles. You can have the shared access policies, which you can map it. If, example, if a person is part of such a ISIM role, ISIM access role, he would get access to the credentials, credential or a credential pool. Now you could have the approval mechanism, which is part of workflow. You can tag it to the role owners. So it goes to the request, approval request for the role owners. Once they approve, the provisioning can happen, or the access is granted. Now here you can see you have a root as an individual or a privileged ID, which is a single privileged ID. Now this can be mapped with a role. You can do that. You can also create several set of privileged IDs. Let's say in this case we have 3 privileged IDs part of privileged group, and those can be part of a credential pool, which will, so anyone who is having this role or here would get access to these IDs based on their availability. So that's the basic configuration overview, just to give an idea how it is inside. Okay, now let's go with a flow how the shared ID management works in IBM Privileged Identity Manager. So here is the legend. You have this C thing as a console. It's a RDP or a PuTTY in this case. AA is the ISAM access agent. We have the server which runs ISAM and ISIM, a web browser, notification via email, and the server application. Let's start. So there's a privileged user. He makes a request. he goes to this web browser and makes a request for a credential. So once the request is received, it goes to the approver then approves it. The response, it goes to his mailbox, he logs into that browser, he approves it, it goes back to the user in a notification saying the access is granted. I'm just considering a happy path here. So once the user gets a notification, he's going to go to that server using RDP or a PuTTY. So he opens that session and he types in the target server name. The moment he does that and hits connect, the access agent is going to intercept it. It's going to fetch the list of pools accessible to this user. So now once the user selects this list, he'll get a dialog saying, okay, to connect to these servers, these are the available pools for you, pool or credentials. So user can select one credentials based on his requirement. So he might want to log in as a domain administrator, or he might want to log in as a power user. So he will select the appropriate pool. The moment he selects, those credentials are fetched from the server and automatically injected into the RDP or the PuTTY or any other profile. It injects those credentials and the session is established. So now user can go in, do his activities, complete it, close the session. The moment he closes the session, the credentials are again checked in to the server. The moment credentials are checked in, now access agent does that on behalf of user. It checks in the credentials back to the server. The moment it happens, passwords for that privileged ID is changed automatically. That's the flow. Now, the same thing what we just saw diagrammatically. Here is the PIM's web interface. It's a self-service interface where user gets to see the options. So here you see the screen where user makes a request access. The moment he clicks that, he gets list of pools. You see here domain admins underscore pool underscore access. Similarly, you have item admin privileged ID pool access. So user is going to click on one of them and he's going to request access. So 1, 2, 3, 4, it shows the process where he makes a request. So this is the request. Now in this case the request is submitted. Now the manager, he gets a notification via email, and when he logs in into the self-service interface, he's going to get the screen with an update saying there's a approval required. Manager logs in, he makes a request here. It's going to approve it or reject it with some comments, and then the approval status shows that he has approved it. Now user made a request, manager approved it. Now user is going to go in and check out the credentials. So he's going to use the credentials now. The approval process is one time. The check-in, check-out is going to continue as and when the user needs it to do his activities. So here he's going to click on checkout. He'll select the ID here. In this case, it's a AD service ID, item admin. He's going to select that, and he's going to give an information. 1 minute. It's checkout information. Now here you can even customize it to add one more field to have ticket number. So you have complete continuity here. So I'm an administrator. I get a ticket to work on some activity. So what I could do is I could customize this form, a checkout form over here. I could add one field to provide ticket number. So this will help auditors to really have a continuity based on this ID, what request has been made and what server and why. The justification is there. So that's the beauty of this. So here the user gives a justification. He clicks on checkout. The moment he does the checkout, there's an option to see the password. Now this view password can be disabled or enabled. You could do that. But when it is in an automated way, the password can be made it to be disabled. But if in case there is no automation, like automated check-in, check-out, in that case you can you need this to be enabled. So that's the view password. You take the password. Once you are done, you do the activity, log into the server, do the activity, come back and click on check-in over here. So when you do the check-in, you select that ID and check-in. The moment you do that, the password is updated. That's all happens from manual standpoint. So here we will talk about automated check-in, check-out. The same thing, user opens a client application, access agent intercepts logon screen, queries PIM web service internally, and it pulls the list of credential pools. User selects the pool. The moment user selects the pool, access agent requests PIM service to retrieve credentials for that pool. So whichever ID is available in that pool is returned back. Using that, access agent is going to automatically fill these credentials to the user screen or the dialog. Once user closes the client session, the account is checked into the credential vault. So that's what happens in a high level. So here I've shown right side. So different models. So individual ID. So you have an individual ID. John Doe, he has his own individual ID. He has sudo to root. This results to identity proliferation. Second one, you have John Doe gets access to root. Now accountability is an issue. Now in this case, you have automated login. Access agent injects the password credentials. JDO does not know the password, so it's secure. So that's the way PIM works with the shared ID management, IDs, shared IDs basically. So now here at the bottom you can see the out-of-box access profiles. For remote desktops you have RDP, you have for terminal services you have PuTTY, SSH client, mainframes, you have IBM personal communicator or a communication client, you have virtual machines, you have VMware, vSphere clients. So automatically it will help you log in and use the end systems. So this is the overview, the screenshot which shows the flow. Here is the screen, PuTTY session. User initiates the PuTTY session. Here is how it gets a pop-up. Says, do you want to use shared credentials? So now here is an option. You want to use shared credentials, you can use it. But if you want to use individual credentials, you can. Just click no and it prompts you to the regular. You just enter your user ID and password, individual ID and password, you continue. But otherwise, if you want to use shared credentials, you just click yes. It pulls a list of pools and user can select it. The moment user selects it, the credentials are injected and session is established. So that's how this is the flow for PuTTY. Same thing happens for other profiles, RDP and the other interfaces. So we are here now to talk about reports. These are standard reports. Plus we have these shared access reports. We have you can even customize it at these are, as I said, TCR helps you customize. You could bring in, you can map it to different data sources, bring all those data in one place. It could be your access management data, your identity management data, your endpoint data. You can bring all those logs and informations through various data sources, put them in one place, and you can customize the reports and get the value out of it, and you can get some insight on the reports and take actions accordingly. So to summarize, generates an audit event when accounts are not checked in on time. So that's where I was talking about lease violations. Next, automatically logs all activities, which includes administrative activities like policy modifications and manual check-in, check-out. Logs all automatic check-in, check-outs and privileged user identities, both activities. Provides a comprehensive audit trail and reports for the privileged access. Organizations can search for and filter specific events or activities. Integrates with security information and event manager, CM solution. We talked about QRadar for end-to-end reporting, log correlation and forensic as an upgrade path. So that's an overview of reports. Best practices for deploying IBM PIM solution. Most of them are similar to the identity management deployment. In this case, first one is incrementally roll out shared IDs. That is, one resource type, deploy and optimize its process, then pick the next type. So you start picking one by one. You go with Windows, or you go with Unix, Linux servers, or one type and complete it closely. So that's how you can easily, that's the best practice suggested, and it has been quite successful. Next, for new deployment, start with the broad policies and roles, and then refine the roles policies to provide more delegation and granular control to respective resource owners. So you start with the broader roles when you're defining roles. Once you get some insight of it, then you can start getting into the granular level of access. Initially, enable display password to user till all use cases are covered by the access profile. This is like, we said that, yeah, we can, user does not have to know the password, it automatically injects. Yes, provided the access profile has covered all the use cases. So in the out-of-box access profiles, you don't have to enable it because it covers, it injects credentials as an, but for the new, it's a suggested way that you keep it in a disable mode, and then once you standardize the access profile, and then you can disable it. Use Access Studio to merge RDP access profiles in case of shared and individual IDs. So right now we have individual ID profiles for individual ID access, and also for the shared access. You can use shared and individual IDs access profile. You can merge it and use it. So that's the benefit there. Define separate credentials So define separate credential pools for each type of privileges. So you have power users, administrators. That's a best practice because you can select based on the pool. If the RDP access profile is configured to automatically check in a shared ID when the RDP session is disconnected. Configure the Windows terminal server to log off each terminal session upon disconnection. Give proper names, descriptions to services that represent each managed resource to help users easily identify or search for IDs and pools that belong to the resource. Give proper names to privileged accounts and credential pools that map to the intended role usage for these accounts so that users can identify the correct credential or pool for checking out. So the naming convention. Apply periodic recertification of shared IDs with IBM Security Identity Manager to ensure there is a continual business need for such IDs to be made available. Deploy the server components for the PIM in a security privileged identity manager in a high availability configuration. You need to follow the existing ISIM and ISAM best practices along with above suggestions. There are other scenarios. There are like on-demand request for shared ID privilege, shared privileged ID. Let's say administrator wants to check out a privilege. Prior to that, you might want to have an approval sought before a user makes. So this could be possible for a very sensitive applications. There you can customize the flow in such a way that you can have the approval kick in the moment user tries to check out. Privileged ID intended for emergency situations. So there are situations where the approvals take time and you need ID and people are not around. So you can configure it in such a way that you can have an emergency role which can grant access to the IDs and you can immediately get the access. Plus you can have notifications sent out to the people who are responsible saying this ID is being used. So that's how you have a control. Linking checkout request with ticketing. As I mentioned earlier, you can customize it to have an interface where users can put in the ticket number for each of their activities they're going to use. So they have a justification why a person logged in. Just a minute. Hello? Okay. Sorry. So here, linking, we talked about ticketing. You can add a ticket number into the checkout process or checkout process so that you have identification like this activity was done for this ticket number. So there is a traceability for auditors. Strong authentication of privileged users through access agent. Enforce credentials used by access agent only by disabling the display password. That's what we talked about. Leverage second factor authentications like proximity badge. Then you have customized the access profile for client applications to prompt for and verify one-time password against an OTP authentication server. Checking out and checking in a shared privileged ID from a shell script, which we talked earlier, that this ID, privileged ID, can be checked out from a script where the script can check out the credentials and run the job. So there is a download available. This utility can be used, and automate the scripts to leverage. So users, as a privileged user, he can run with his credentials or he can log into the server, he runs this script. Indirectly, it's going to fetch these credentials, inject it to the respective backend server, and then initiate the job. Next, integrating checkout of privileged IDs into enterprise applications. Now, the IBM Security Identity Manager shared access module has APIs that can be leveraged by other applications. So this is a web services API. So any applications, enterprise application, can take the benefit the way the utility is doing. So they can use it to check out this credential for a process and return it once the process is done. So you have all the traceability and a secured way of doing it. So there is no way administrator needs to know the password. So this is about prerequisites, which most of the prerequisites can be found on the website. So I will just get into the discussions, the Q&A sessions, as we have already passed the time. Here are the links which you have. The information center. There are adapters where you can find. There is the development kit. There is the Access Studio, link to the Access Studio. All right, I think we're done here. We are ready for the discussions. Back to you, Mohini.
So much for the presentation, Abhay. I would request the attendees to please send in their questions now so that they can listen to insights from Abhay.
All right. So Jatin Patel has a question. What is a single sign-on? So we have, in an enterprise, we have several applications. So what happens is these applications are hosted on different servers with different identity stores. So let's consider your Gmail. You have Gmail, you have Yahoo, and you log into these web applications with your different IDs. Now what if I log in to Gmail with my with my Gmail ID, and now I go to the Yahoo Mail ID, then mails. I should not be, I need not have to log in. So automatically it should single sign on with my ID, with my Gmail ID over there. So that is single sign on. Same concept applies in the enterprise level where you have different applications. So your HRMS is there, your accounts is there, your resource application is there. Now you have one ID and a password. You log in your Active Directory. Let's say you log in at one place and then you automatically sign on to other applications. So it saves time. You have one ID to remember. So that's single sign on. What is the price for the product? I think it's we can get you this detail. Maybe you can connect directly with me on the email ID. I can connect you to the right department so that you can get the price. So I have 1 minute. I'm just trying to adjust the screen here. Pramod Kumar Gondi has a question. Okay. Give me 1 minute. I'm just trying to arrange my screen here. Okay. Can you please explain? Sorry, this is back to Saurabh's question because it's his first. Can you please explain again the pseudo person identity? Okay. So pseudo person identity is like you have in a non-pseudo mode, you have one user ID or let's say a person record, and you have several accounts tagged to it. Now, in a pseudo mode, you have a generic ID or a person record created, and to that you tag all the IDs. Let's say root IDs. On all these servers, you take all these root IDs and tag them to this pseudo ID. So that's the concept. So once, if there are several IDs tagged to this one person record, which has, impacts the software, because that's not the way softwares are developed. Because you can't have like 3,000 or 4,000 IDs tagged to one person. So that's the concept there. Maybe if you want more details, you can, I can respond back to you over the email. Let me go here. What if the user have the access to multiple roles for the same server, but ID he wants might be reusable or shared? How does the injection is managed? So what happens is, so you have multiple roles, yes. So what happens is you'll get several list of pools. So the moment user makes a request to a server, correct? And on this server, user has several, let's say, roles. You have power user, you have domain administrator, you have enterprise administrator. Now, the tool will give you, the access agent will give you list of pools. So now the user is going to select that pool and log in. So that's how it is managed. So it doesn't matter how many different types of roles you have. You can, user has an option to select by which one he wants to log in. So that's the answer to Pramod Kumar Gondi. Next, Pramod Kulkarni has a question here. How long does it take to implement PIM? So it depends on the complexity of the implementation. Like, how big the environment is. It depends if it is like a small scale. Then if it's a small enterprise, then you have it could take like 2 to 3 weeks, and if it is quite large, it might take years. So it technically depends on the complexity of the environment, the level of privileged IDs being used, and how they are being shared. So it depends. But if you have any specific environment, you have to be, you're looking for a timeline, then you can connect to me. I can, suggest you. I can help you with that. IBM Lab Services helps you with that. Yep. Okay. So Ayush Nag has a question. What are pooled reusable credentials? So here is the thing. We talked about identity proliferation, right? So instead of having so many IDs or each ID, an ID for each user on every system, what we have done is we have created a pool, and you'll have only few IDs created, and based on the need, you can, based on the need, you can allow these users to use these IDs. So let's say having those many IDs on several systems, it has issues like, several issues like, productivity goes down, security risk goes high, cost of management is high, and all those things. So what we have done is we have set a pool. We have few IDs. Based on the need, we'll have only those many IDs in the pool. So let's say in a day you have 3 administrators using using several servers. So I'll just have 2 IDs based on the how the time is being split. So I don't need like 10 IDs created. So that's the pool concept. So next question is from Ayush Nag. Can you please explain recertification policy? Okay, so here is what it is. You have, let's say there is a request made to a privileged ID, manager approves it, and user is using this credential. Now, in the course of time, this user might have moved to another department, or he might have left, or he might have, as I said, got transferred to some other department. Now, you need to really know whether this is required, this access to this user is required or not. How would a manager know? That is where recertification policy comes into the picture. So since these are privileged IDs, the need for recertification is high. That's where a new request, a scheduled request is made to all the managers, or based on the user's manager or ID owner's manager, to recertify access. Based on his response, the access to this ID is granted or removed. So that's why recertification is required. Next is, does access agent differentiate between shared IDs and reusable IDs? Because reusable ID password is not known to users and password is known to users. 1 minute. Does access agent differentiate between shared IDs and reusable IDs? Because reusable was not known to the users and shared IDs was known. No, either way also it's the same. It doesn't differentiate. The question is, does access agent differentiate between shared ID and reusable ID? Because reusable ID password is not known to the user and shared ID password is known to the user. Either way, it doesn't differentiate. It just gives you an option to select that credential. So at any given point of time, the PIM should be able to know the password, because whenever user returns this credential, he's going to provide the password if he's changed the password. So that's the concept. I'll go to the next. When requesting access, what if manager is not present or is not able to approve? Yeah, that's the escalation. You can configure the escalation through, it's your workflows. You can configure the workflows in such a way that you can have next level of escalation. It could go to manager's manager, or it could go to a default role. You can have that. That is using the workflows. That is for Tarun Singh. Okay, the next question is from Ayush Nag. How is SACLI or the SACLI controlled through PIM? So basically, the details are like this. I mean, it's a wrapper around the web services API, which can, through which you can pass on your individual credentials. Based on your individual credentials, PIM is going to return the list of pools. Now, the configuration will have which pool to use for this service. So once that is set, the Scali or SACLI is going to, or the shared access command line interface is going to retrieve these credentials on the fly from the server, because you have mapped the correct pool name. So it's going to retrieve that and inject it. So through this command line, there is no need for having a list. It's going to default for a certain pool only. So you have to map it. The mapping is done. It's going to retrieve those credentials and inject it. So that's how it's going to work. Okay, Saurav Galav. Okay, Saurav Galav has a nice question here. You told that when any admin logs out, then its credentials are changed, and when admin again logs into that, he gets a new password again. How he gets the new password? That's a good question. So what happens is, whenever you check in or return the credentials are changed by the ISIM or the IBM Privileged Identity Manager. It's going to change in the background for you, and it's going to update it because it knows when you check it out. So when you check in back, it's going to know that it's going to use that password, change it in the background, update its own credential store. So whenever next time a user checks out, he will get a new password. So that's how it works.
Well, those were the only questions we had.
Okay.
Thank you so much for the presentation and the answers, Sabir.
Yeah, no problem. If you have any more questions, they can send me the questions to my email if they want. I can answer them.
Yeah, sure. I would also like to thank all our participants for the support in making this webinar a success. The recording of the session would be available on techgig.com by tomorrow. Thank you all. Have a great evening.
Thank you all. Thank you, Mohini.